On this episode of Let's Talk Drones, we are continuing our NDAA compliant FPV build series. And we're continuing the series by setting up our RxTX protocol, or our ImmersionRC Ghost protocol. We're running on the 2.4 band, and there are a few things I need to show you in order to get this thing set up so that we can actually start to fly it. Now, this isn't a difficult process, but if you've never used Ghost before, it is something that you have to learn, and that's why it's taken me a while to get to this point in the series, is because I've had to learn it myself. I've only ever used ExpressLRS and Crossfire before, so it's not involved the same steps that you need to take to get Ghost to work. Again, not difficult, just different. So let's not waste any more time. Let's talk drones. What's up? It's Chris, the Drone Geek, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Drones. That's right, we are setting up our transmitter and receiver for our NDAA compliant FPV build drone. This is really what's standing between us and flying the drone at this point. So getting this set up is obviously optimally important. Now, before I get into the configuration and binding, there is something I need to backtrack on a little bit from a previous video that you've seen in the series, where I actually integrate the receiver into the build. Now, when I did that, I created a JST connector for it that had all 4 ports used up, and that is not correct. In fact, that's only going to give you problems. Now, when we look at this section of the wiring diagram from the Orca F405 3030 flight controller manual, you'll see here we have displayed the SIK port. This is where we plug our receiver into. Now, on the diagram, it shows a 4-pin JST GH connector, and when I set this up originally and integrated the receiver hardware into our build, I had all 4 pins used as the diagram states, because there were 4 pins into the connector and there are 4 pads on the receiver that I soldered to. So from the get-go, I had this wrong, and here's why. When we look at this picture that I took of the Ghost Atto receiver, you'll see that we do have 4 pads, as I indicated earlier. And originally, I had soldered all of our wires to those pads to plug into the JST GH connector on the flight controller. However, what I didn't know is that the T on the receiver does not stand for transmitter, it stands for tramp. Now, what tramp is used in is actually video transmission. So if we were running our VTX through a Ghost protocol when it comes to communicating from a receiver to a transmitter, that's where we would use this pad. This does not go into the receiver port on the Orca F405. It will cause issues and your receiver will not work correctly. So we don't want to use the T pad, the very upper pad there, just above the S. We only want to use the S, the positive, and the ground. And I figured this out by going to ImmersionRC's website and looking at the wiring diagram for the Atto receiver. Now, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner of this diagram I pulled from that website, we have an Atto/Zepto diagram, but essentially it's the same receiver that we're using on our build. You'll see there are 4 pads, just like on our receiver. We have tramp, SRXL2, 5-volt, and ground. We only want to use the SRXL2 because if you look at the diagram, when we wire this directly to the flight controller, the SRXL2 goes to our TX pad, or our TX pin on our flight controller. The 5-volt goes to the 5-volt pin, and the ground goes to the ground pin, but there's nothing being used on the RX pad or pin on our flight controller. That tramp actually goes to the IRC Tramp Nano. Now, I'm assuming, and I don't know for sure, that the Tramp Nano is used to communicate with VTXs in some capacity. So since we're not using the Tramp Nano or any type of communication from our receiver to our VTX, we don't need to utilize the Tramp pad. If you try to utilize the Tramp pad without wiring it to the IRC Tramp Nano and pulling your VTX in somehow, you're going to have an issue with your receiver actually behaving the way it needs to behave. So just wire the SRXL2 to the TX on your SIK port for your flight controller, the 5-volt to the 5-volt, and the ground to the ground. Guys, I apologize for that oversight. Again, I've never used Ghost before, so this is a learning experience for me too. I just learned something new about FPV, and I'm diving deeper into that whole tramp setup. I'd like to learn a little bit more. Doesn't mean that I'm going to build one, but I'd like to know what it means so that when people are talking to me, I don't come off as an idiot as I'm talking to them about different componentry and how builds should be structured. So Learning moment for everybody. I apologize. It should be a pretty quick fix for you. You just have to desolder the tramp pad from the receiver and then pull that wire out of the JST connector that you plugged into the flight controller. It's as easy as that. If you try to have the tramp in through the receiver on your flight controller, nothing bad will happen. I did it several times, and when I tell you I struggled with this, I struggled with it. It will not do anything to harm your build, but you just won't be able to communicate with the receiver. It'll be stuck in this perpetual sort of bricked mode. It's not bricked permanently, but as long as you have that connector in the receiver pin for your flight controller, it's not going to act right and you won't be able to bind it. It wasn't until I fixed that and this takes us into our next phase of this process. Let's go ahead and jump on Betaflight, because before we try to bind our transmitter to our receiver, it's important that our flight controller understands what communication protocol it's looking for when it comes to our receiver and our transmitter. It just takes a few moments, it's a few steps, and it's not all that difficult. So let's go there now. In order to get our flight controller to understand the Ghost protocol and actively search for it on its UART system, we need to make a couple of changes in Betaflight. So we don't need to power our drone on with a battery, we just need to plug our USB-C cable into our computer and then into the flight controller, and then everything should be connected here. You've seen this page before in this series. This is our setup page for our Betaflight drone configurator. So the first step we're going to do is we're going to come to the Ports tab. When you go to the Ports tab, we've seen this page before when we configured our BTX. This is where we're going to pay attention to a new column and a new row. We're going to come over to the Serial RX column. Now, the Serial RX column is where you tell the flight controller your receiver for your control system is going to be. So if you're using, whether it's ExpressLRS, TBS Crossfire, or ImmersionRC's Ghost, this is where you're going to tell your flight controller to search for it. In the case of the Orca F405 3030 flight controller and the Ghost protocol, you want to use UART 6. This is going to be the one that has the receiver program to it. You'll see a lot of resources out there, and Google AI will tell you in the search results that UART 1 is the way to go. I tried UART 1 over and over and over again, and it would not work. It wasn't until I started to monkey with the UARTs and select everything except for UART 5. We know that's where the BTX is at. It wasn't until I started to monkey between UART 1, UART 3, and UART 6 that I found UART 6 is the receiver protocol on the flight controller. So that's what you want to use. So now that we've confirmed that and we've got our UART 6 set for our Serial RX, we want to come down to Save and Reboot. Once the drone is powered back on and reconnected through Betaflight, it will bring you back to its setup page. We'll just go down to the Ports tab just to double check, and yes, under Serial RX, we do have UART 6 toggled on. That means the flight controller will communicate via UART 6 for any of the drone inputs that you do through the transmitter to the receiver to tell the drone what to do in the air. The next step in this is to go to the Receiver tab. You want to pay attention to one section here. It's the receiver section. The two most important fields are receiver mode and serial receiver provider. Under serial mode, you want to select serial via UART. That's going to tell the flight controller that the receiver is programmed under the serial UART system. That means the flight controller will search through the UARTs, which we have programmed to UART 6, for the receiver. The next thing you want selected is IRC Ghost. There's another resource out there that will tell you to select SRXL2 under Spectrum. That is not correct for this. If we were using the Tramp tab through the BTX, whatever that looks like, that's where we'd select Spectrum SRXL2. But since we're not using that Tramp pad for the receiver, we want to select IRC Ghost. That's what we're going to be using. That's the protocol we're using, and that's what we want programmed here. So we'll click Save, and that is saved to the drone's flight controller. Finally, what we want to do is we want to come down to the CLI tab. Now, the reason we're in the CLI tab, and I know this is a little bit scary because you have to do some real programming here by typing in commands, it's simple. The reason that we're here is because for the Ghost protocol, we actually have to turn the half duplex on for the Serial RX. It's currently by default set to off, so we want to turn that on. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to type set Serial RX underscore half duplex equals on. Okay, and once that's on, it will be set the way it needs to be set to communicate with the Ghost protocol. So we'll go ahead and we will disconnect. and the device has rebooted. So our half duplex is set to on. At this point now, we can actually move on to binding the transmitter to the receiver. Now that we've got our flight controller configured to not just search for, but also communicate with the Ghost protocol and also the port, the UART port that the receiver is plugged into, it's time to move on to the binding process. We'll be binding our transmitter and our receiver, and we're going to start with our transmitter because if I'm being honest, this is where the majority of the work takes place in this phase. So the first thing you want to do is you need to download and install a couple of things on your computer. I've got links down below to each of these components to this process so that you know that you're downloading from a vetted and safe place. I know the internet can be a scary place and that downloads aren't always what they appear to be, but I promise if you use the links down below, you won't run into any issues with malware. So down below, you're going to first use the link to download and install the ImmersionRC drivers. You need to install these on your machine so that ImmersionRC can detect COM ports that have their receivers and transmitters plugged into them. Once you've got these drivers installed on your machine, I highly recommend that you power cycle your machine just to ensure that the drivers are in place and ready to work when you move on to the next step. Once you've got your machine powered back up, you then need to go down to the other download link that's down there, which is for the Ghost Updater installer for either Windows or Mac, whatever you're running. Once you've downloaded and installed your Ghost Updater, it's then time to interface with the transmitter. You're going to turn your radio on just by pressing and holding on the Radiomaster TX16S. There we go. And you'll see once it's turned on that we will have some power that will go to the backpack once I've got the throttle in the right place. So we've got power to our backpack. And you'll see on power up there, you'll have a screen with some numbers on it. Some places will be blank. And you'll also see, it looks a little orange in the camera, but a red light coming out of the backpack. That shows that the backpack is powered on, but it's not currently bound to anything, and we're going to change that here in just a few minutes. But before we do that, you'll need a micro USB plug to go in the backpack. Sorry, I got a little tripped up on that because I haven't said micro USB in a long time. So you're going to plug your micro USB into that port. Sorry, I'm trying to get that to focus. You can see what it is. You get the picture. Plug it into that port on the top of the backpack while your transmitter is turned on. Once you've plugged that in, we need to go to the desktop and we need to open up our Ghost Updater if it's not already open, and I'll take you through the next few steps. We have our transmitter plugged into our computer via that micro USB port I showed you a little bit earlier. Now it's time to open our Ghost Updater, which is this little red ghost icon with a couple of what looks like frequency indicators above it. It's pretty cute. I'll go ahead and double click that, open it up. It will take a second, but under this ports drop down, it will detect the COM port, there it is, for your Ghost module. Now, whether you're using a JR or a Nano module, it does not matter. It should pop up here, and the reason that it popped up here is because we installed those ImmersionRC drivers to our machine. If we had not done that, this would not detect the proper COM port for our transmitter, which means that we can't update the firmware. So if you haven't already done the driver updates for ImmersionRC, go back and do that now because you won't even make it to this point without those drivers installed. I know it's a little scary, but I promise it will be okay. Once you've got your drivers installed and your port is being detected for your Ghost JR or Nano module, you're going to come down here to the version dropdown. Now, this is as of December 4th, 2025. That's when this video is being recorded. If you're watching this in the future, first of all, hello from the past, but second of all, this number probably won't match. They will have probably updated the firmware by the time you're watching this. If it's a significant distance out in the future, I imagine our numbers won't match. The important thing to remember is that you want to download either the alpha or the stable version of a firmware. If you download anything else, you may have compatibility issues, but as long as you stick with alpha or stable, everything should be okay. So I'm going to go ahead and select that 1.0.8.6 alpha, and then from here, I'm going to update Ghost. And you'll see it'll take you through a process here where it flashes the firmware to the controller, and it just takes a few minutes for this to go through its processes. And it's as simple as that. Our update is complete and our transmitter has the updated firmware. Now we can officially move on to binding this to our receiver. So we've got our firmware updated. The next step we need to do before we power the drone on is we need to set up our binding and updating settings. So we're just gonna go ahead and press down on that little toggle stick there in the middle. Just press down on that. it will take you into the main menu. We're then going to press down again to select bind, and then we're going to start bind. Now, by default, there will be nothing here about the firmware update, and we actually need to update the firmware on the receiver. To do that, you just press to the right, I believe is what it would be. It's the opposite direction of the skip, which would be to the opposite direction. You'll see there, it shows force update. Now, we go ahead and we skip by pressing in the opposite direction, and to test it, we just go ahead and we go through the bind process again, and it should be bind with force update. And it is. So we're gonna go ahead and skip out of this again. Now it's time to power on your drone. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that now. So now that we've got the drone on, you should see that blue light, either flashing or solid on the receiver. That means the receiver's in binding mode. You then want to go into that menu that I showed you before, press down on the toggle, go to bind, go to start bind, and it should force the update. Now, once it starts to force the update, it will start doing things on the screen. You'll see statuses update, you'll see a progress bar. It will come through, and it will go through all of those processes to ensure that everything is being bound the way it's supposed to be bound and that firmware is being updated the way it's supposed to be updated. Once you get to the end of that process, it will tell you that the binding process has been completed, and then you should see a green light on your receiver. If there's a green light on your receiver and there's a green light on your transmitter and you're getting telemetry data on all of the fields on your transmitter, you are successfully bound. Now it's time to double check our work together. So what you need to do is ensure that your drone's flight controller is plugged into the computer like we were doing when we were configuring it a little bit earlier, and you also want to power on the drone with a LiPo battery. So once you've got that set up, your drone's powered on and plugged into your computer, and you have beta flight pulled up and you're at the setup page, you want to come down to the receiver tab. And if we've done everything correctly to this point, our inputs on our controller, which is also powered up and in my hands currently, should result in feedback on this screen. So when I give pitch and roll and yaw and throttle, those little indicators on the screen should respond accordingly, and the drone should move the way that I'm moving it with my controller. So as long as your screen is behaving the way that mine is, and it's responding to your inputs the way that they are to my inputs, you've done everything correctly, and your receiver and your transmitter are now officially bound, and your flight controller is communicating with your receiver and giving the drone performance commands. Congratulations! Your drone is now communicating with your transmitter, which means we are very, very close to getting the drone airborne. Now, I would go through how to set up all of your modes so that you could get the drone arming, but I'm going to save that for next video in the interest of time. I want these lessons to be as compact and concise as possible, so look for the next episode to come out here within the next few days, and I'll show you how to go through all of those processes. I am here to tell you, even if you are a little frustrated that I'm not going to go through the modes right now, that once we get through that next video, you will be able to fly your drone. And we'll talk about how you make that happen in that next video. In the meantime, though, let me know down in the comments below if you like this series, if you'd like to see me do anything different, or if I've sort of skimmed over or not talked about something that you'd like to have explained to you. Let me know down in the comments below. I really appreciate it, and it's the best way to communicate with me on what I could be doing better to serve your needs as a viewer. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up icon down below. It helps me out a lot, helps get this video out into the algorithm to more viewers like yourself. And if you really love this video and you love drone content shot by drones, about drones, and for drone pilots, my friend, this is the channel for you. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and while you're at it, hit the bell icon too. You'll get a notification every time I post a new video. Until next time, I'm Chris the Drone Geek, and I'm out of here. See ya!
Yo, what you say? Steady screaming, YOLO rock.